the theme at this year's conference. It's also at the heart of our practice of the Radical Center, which many of you are familiar with. We've entered a changed time, and it will require us to think differently and to act differently, to focus on working together, to look for leadership from underrepresented voices, and to fundamentally shift our relationship to the earth. We chose to focus on resilience in times of uncertainty, perhaps for obvious reasons, but you may have noticed a number of other themes that are woven throughout this year's offerings. They include racial equity and justice, Indigenous knowledge, and climate adaptation. These themes are inherently interconnected. Increasing levels of uncertainty are our new normal. According to climate scientists worldwide, we have around a decade to dramatically reduce carbon emissions and begin to sequester carbon unless we're prepared to face all the potential catastrophes that come with global climate change. Catastrophes that more often than not disproportionately affect people of color. These same people also hold critical knowledge about land stewardship, resource management, hardship navigation, and valuing relationships that we would all be wise to value and learn from. For these reasons and many more, we've chosen to make these voices integral to this year's conversations. Today, I'm phoning in and wish I was zooming in so that I could see you all from Polk's Folly Farm, which is located in San Antonio, New Mexico. The farm sits on the traditional homelands of the Tano and Tiwa people. The historic Tano pueblos of Paco and Oapa, currently known as La Madera, are embedded in the memory of this landscape where I am. Today, many descendants of these people still live in the historic Generizo land grant villages of the East Mountains. New Mexico is the ancestral and present-day home to the Apache, Dene, and Pueblo tribes and peoples. Indigenous peoples from other tribal nations also live here. They have made and continue to make innumerable contributions to this region, in particular, millennia of thoughtful, effective land stewardship, in spite of suffering several centuries of colonization, land theft, and many other types of inhumane and violent treatment. I personally am committed to building partnerships with these neighbors as I recognize the value in their knowledge, in rectifying the wrongs of the past, and in creating space for their leadership because it's requisite for us to all heal our planet. What I've just offered is a land acknowledgement. For some of you, offering this type of statement may already be a practice that you engage in. And if you're unfamiliar with land acknowledgement, it's a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous people as traditional stewards of the land and the enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. To recognize the land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory you reside on, and a way of honoring Indigenous people who've been living and working on the land from time immemorial. I think it's important to understand the longstanding history that has brought me to where I am, and I hope to be able to understand this place within that history, and I invite you to do the same. Land acknowledgements do not exist in past tense or in a historical context. Colonialism is a current and ongoing process, and for me, and I hope that you will join me in understanding what our current participation in that process is. This is the first time that I've offered a land acknowledgement for the farm where I live, and I've been living here since the beginning of the pandemic. I've given other land acknowledgements before. I understand why they're important, but this is the first time that I'm doing it for this place. I recognize that learning the history of a place, developing the language to talk about that history, what currently happens in a place, and the future of the land in a way that's authentic, it's hard work. It's uncomfortable, and it takes research, support, and vulnerability to develop the language to say these things out loud. So now I'm going to invite all of you to participate and to practice land acknowledgement. So think about where you are, think about the land underneath your feet, and because I can't put up a lights off slide, I will just ask all of you, perhaps if you have your videos on for the moment, to turn them off. and to take a minute or two to think about where you are, and then to put a sentence into the chat box to acknowledge the land you're on and the indigenous people of that land. Even if it's imperfect or a simple "I don't know," that's okay. I hope that you will share something. We are adjusting the chat box so that when you enter your statement, our moderators will be the ones who receive it. Not everyone will see it. And then we're going to aggregate all of these so we can post them back to you anonymously. We hope that this enables you to put forth an honest response. This is an invitation to practice land acknowledgement together, recognizing that for many of us, this may be the first time doing it. So I hope you dive in to this practice with us. Think about, what do you notice within yourself when you broaden your curiosity and understanding of the land that you steward? We'll be doing this again throughout other points during the conference, and we hope that over the course of the next 3 weeks that you will develop this practice with us, and when we do this at the end of the conference, that many of us will know a lot more about the places where we live. So with that, I am going to turn the floor and the screen over to Ann Adams, the Director of Holistic Management International. Thank you all again for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Got my screen on, so I think we're good to go here. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate the opportunity to welcome everyone to the 2020 Regenerate Conference, and I'd like to do that on behalf of Holistic Management International. And I'm zooming from my home at Happy-Go-Lucky Farm in Tahique, New Mexico. And I would like to acknowledge that this land is the traditional ancestral land of the Tiwa people. So as we near the end of 2020, we do find that our world has vastly changed from how the year began, as we try and figure out what it means to be resilient in times of uncertainty. And I thought about this, and I went to the definition, or one definition of resilience, which is the capacity of a system to absorb change while still maintaining its basic structure or function. And I believe what we've seen in the last 9 months is just how broken so many of our systems were, and that living life on a razor's edge is something many people had been experiencing long before this pandemic emerged to whisk back the curtain of denial and illusion. So now we must focus on creating and recreating social, economic, and natural systems that will actually serve all our communities in ways that are just, equitable, and regenerative. To do so requires compassion and understanding of this complex web of life. It will require more of us than we have yet had to give. It will seem difficult because this time of great change will feel uncomfortable, requiring us all to question our assumptions and biases about people, including ourselves, agricultural practices, markets, and so much more. I believe that the only way we can succeed in creating these just, equitable, and regenerative systems is to embrace what has been the knowledge of all our ancestors, if we go back far enough in time. It was in our indigenous roots from which we all sprung, whether we were Incan, Roman, Hohokam, Celt, Puebloan, Aborigine, Persian, Inuit, Chinese, or some combination of the hundreds of civilizations who have called Earth home. It is the knowledge that our actions must stem from the belief that I am because we are because I am. Community must serve individuals, and individuals must serve the community, including our natural community of plants, animals, birds, and organisms, who in turn serve us. I think it's so important that we engage in gatherings like Regenerate, where we have the opportunities to connect and learn new ideas. Depending on where you are in the process of responding to this time of uncertainty and how much stress you've been under before it arrived at our doors, you may get different things from this conference. But I hope more than anything else, you experience the community that is here who wants to support each of us toward the goal of being a part of the solution in creating the just, equitable, and regenerative systems we need in our evolution as sentient beings. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and pass it over to Carrie Balcom.
There we go. Good morning, all. Thank you all very much for including me. There are a lot of wonderful faces that I know on here. Welcome. And a lot of faces that I hope to meet. I'm thankful for the partnership with Quivera and HMI, which brings much to the American Grass-Fed Association as thought partners. I'm grateful every day for the ability to work with and call on these fine folks. I remember as a kid of 5 or 6 with my dad or grandfather, other family members listening and talking to other farmers and ranchers about the uncertainties around farming and ranching, weather, water, lack of, or too much of, and many other things. This quote is attributed to John F. Kennedy, and he said, "The farmer is the only man in our economy who buys everything at retail, sells everything at wholesale, and pays the freight both ways." Ranching and farming has always had a large element of uncertainty to it. But as we realize that this big blue ball we call home becomes more fragile, we must listen to the signal she is sending us and correct and learn. The conversations that we will have over the next couple of weeks will include many of those things. You will hear about equity in many forms and how it must be a part of the conversation moving forward. In talking about equity, we have brought speakers in to talk about equity in the marketplace as well. The methods of farming that are being done by you all needs to find equity in the marketplace. It is something that I, among others, you will hear from, have been working on for years, and we see glimmers of hope in our policies at the local and federal levels. In my opinion, the fight can no longer be one-size-fits-all agriculture, but an equitable system that rewards you as stewards of the land fairly. This definition of equity should be a pillar of our conversations moving forward. Some of the keynote speakers you have graciously accepted our invitations will speak to marketplace equity and justice. Some of these voices will be new to you and will bring different perspectives and will challenge you. As Sarah mentioned, we hope you'll be listening, hope you'll be open to listening to new ideas. Today, as I'm zooming in from the Grass-Fed office in Denver, Colorado, where I was born, but I grew up in a very culturally diverse community in South Florida, where we still have land and cattle, has given me a rich appreciation for those around me. The land where my family has been for generations is home to the Calusa, Tequesta, which is now called Cuesta, and many other tribes. The Seminole tribe, which some refer to early on as the Wild People, were also joined by runaway slaves. Still play an important part in the ranching and farming communities where my family has been and still continues today. The heritage and culture they bring to the farming community is evident. The first recorded non-native settlers were the Spanish, one of which was my great-great-grandfather, who settled in Florida about 1565. But the native and indigenous peoples were there before. As the community has changed over the years to include many different cultures, it is now comprised of Hispanic, Cuban, Jamaican, Hispaniola, the Dominican Republic, and Haitians, Puerto Rico, African American, African, white, Native American, Asian, and Pacific Islanders. So I hope, and I'm so thankful that you all have given me a chance to speak to you today. I am honored to be part of this. And let's move on and hear from all these other wonderful people. And thank you.
Thank you, Ann and Carrie. I really appreciate that. And I'm still not able to get my video up, but we will forge ahead here. Next, I would like to welcome and introduce Jovan Sage, who will offer an invocation for this year's gathering. She is an herbalist, wellness coach, doula, and food alchemist, and her work centers on personal and community resilience, healing with food and plant medicine, and connecting with land, source, and ancestral guidance. Jovan, do you want to take the screen, please?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I am based in coastal Georgia. I am on land that was originally spoken by the Wale people here down on the coast, and then the rice fields tended by enslaved Africans, many of whom you may know as Gullah Geechee. Our farm here is also 10 minutes from where Ahmaud Arbery was murdered in February. And so we know what that tension between survival and resilience looks like. in the face of adversity. And so I actually have two poems that I'm going to share. I just feel like they're companion works by Audre Lorde. And the first one is called A Litany for Survival. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone. For those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways coming and going, in the hours between dawns looking inward and outward, at once before and after, seeking a now that can breed futures, like bread in our children's mouths, so their dreams will not reflect the death of ours. For those of us who were imprinted with fear, like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk for by this weapon. This illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hope to silence us, for all of us. This instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning. When our stomachs are full, we are afraid of indigestion. When our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again. When we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. When we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard, nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive. The next piece is called Coping, again by Audre Lorde. It has rained for 5 days. Running, the world is a round puddle of sunless water, where small islands are only beginning to cope. A young boy in my garden is bailing out water from his flower patch. When I ask him why, he tells me young seeds that have not seen sun forget and drown easily. I think both of those speak to this idea of resilience, of survival, and also as seed keepers and land tenders, that hope of seeing a seed come to fruition. And so also for our Native and Indigenous folks, and also, you know, folks who are descended from enslaved Africans, this idea of survival and that we weren't meant to survive, and yet here we are, showing up, speaking our languages and connecting and being able to share it with all of you here and also everyone around the world as we are in this very unique moment in time. So again, thank you. And hopefully you take those words and also write down some of these nations and these peoples whose lands we have taken over and have learned to tend as best as we know how. And again, remember those seeds.
Jovan, thank you so much for that really wonderful invocation and for your thoughts and for being here. I'm going to just make a couple of quick announcements before we transition into our first plenary of Regenerate 2020. I want to thank our sponsors. We've had many generous sponsors contribute to make this event possible. Thank our volunteers and our technical support, both in-house and out-of-house, who've helped us to take the conference online this year. It's been an enormous lift, and I'm grateful to all of you. Also, thank you to all of our staff people who've put in so many hours and so much work to make all of this happen. And there are many others who I think that I have not mentioned who have whose generosity has made this event possible. I wanted to remind you that every Monday and Wednesday for the next 3 weeks, we will have a plenary session, and we hope you will join us. Each of those sessions has the same Zoom number as one. We've done that intentionally to try to make it more straightforward to join us. And I think that I was supposed to introduce the outside, but Leah and Summer, I'm going to ask you to introduce our facilitation team, if you don't mind, since I am continuing to experience technical difficulties. So welcome everybody to Regenerate 2020. Thank you again for being here. Here we go, let us commence.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you so much, Jovan. I hadn't heard those poems, and I would love if you could send those to me or one of us, and we'll post them on the session. Those are beautiful. That young boy bailing out the water and connecting with plants and understanding their needs is really special. That was wonderful. And so I'm going to lead us through a grounding, but first I do want to just say a big shout out, thank you, gratitude to the outside. We brought them in to help us facilitate these plenaries, and more than just these plenaries, our conference, in a way that was really inclusive and participatory. And they have just been stellar, and I couldn't imagine doing this without them. And so you will see a number of folks from the outside throughout the conference. And today I have the honor and pleasure of co-facilitating with Summer Sibley Brown from the outside. And you will meet her in just a second. And for the moment, I would like to say that here we are. And we're going to transition into the plenary. And as we transition, let's just ground back into our bodies and into our breath. So at this time, I invite you to find a comfortable position. Land inside your body. Feel free to close your eyes if that feels supportive. And also you can turn off your camera if that feels supportive too, whatever you need. Let your breath slow down and deepen. I'll take a few breaths here just to show you what I mean. Rock back and forth a little bit. Feel your connection to the ground below you. I invite you to lift your shoulders up as you inhale and let them drop down as you exhale. And do this a few more times. You can watch me if you don't know what I'm talking about. Great, thank you all for taking a moment to just ground in. I think it's helpful to just get back into our bodies. And so we're all here today to participate in the plenary and roundtable around the topic of regenerative agriculture in the face of climate change. This is an incredibly meaningful panel at an incredibly important time when we need to be having these types of conversations. And we all know that agriculture is one of the biggest contributors to climate change. We are also approaching a paradigm shift, increasingly understanding how agriculture can be a solution to climate change. And our amazing lineup of panelists will help us understand and embody this shift. Before I introduce you to the panelists, I'd first like to welcome Summer Sibley Brown, who I mentioned before, and thank her again for all the work that has brought us to where we are today with these plenaries. And I will pass it to Summer to lead us through the process of this plenary and how it's going to work. Summer?
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for that amazing landing to all the conference coordinators and Leah for the grounding breath. I want to say that this is a human-centered activity, right? It is a conference about regenerative agriculture, but the conference team was very clear that their desire was to build community. And the thing that they wanted to capture most about their long existing Kivera conferences was community and the safety and love and inspiration that their participants and conference goers share every year to get together. So we, the outside, in our process design, are doing our best attempt to capture that spark, that magic that Sarah kept referencing, the magic that happens at the Regenerate conference by allowing us to work in new ways, right? So first of all, this might feel a little different. It's not a panel that's talking at you. It's actually very conversational. There'll be lots of spaces for your voice in between. And I want to apologize and say thank you in advance for bearing with us with the long introduction, because this is the first plenary of this 3-week period. And by the end of this, you'll be pros, and I will not need to give any introduction because we'll all know what to do, right? We'll be family. Lynn, if we could share slides, and I will move through them as quickly as possible because you guys didn't come here to hear me speak. We have 4 awesome panelists. So, I will wait for, thank you. And so we're gonna go to the agenda slide. Like I said, welcome, welcome, welcome. And so for today's agenda, Leah already did the grounding session, right? So the way this is set up is we're gonna ask you a check-in question, and then we're gonna have speaker rounds, 2 speaker rounds, and then a final round. In between the speaker rounds, there is a breakout session where you will be sent to rooms where you will be in community conversations among each other. In those rooms, you may see a quiet participant who is a sense maker, popping in, just observing, and popping out. Those are the people who will be weaving together all the themes that they're hearing. Next slide. So there are some guidelines and rules we'd like to give you to help you participate if this is your first time. So please type and enter your name. I see most of you have already done that. We're encouraging you to speak from your experience, listen to learn, and give space. This conference is not about just expertise, though we have panels of people who have rich lived experience and honed skill in that area. We endeavor to lean into the expertise and the experience of all the people who are here so we can harness some collective genius for the way forward. Cameras on, please mute when you're not speaking. And the camera on is deliberate. Many conferences you go, you only see the presenter and you're not aware who's there with you. Part of building community was us seeing each other's faces. Please, this is our first time doing this virtually, and we're attempting to do things in a new way, which is necessary. So presence, patience, and empathy. We ask that you amplify value. So keep your comments focused on adding value to the conversation that we're having. We also want you to be aware that everybody can see your commentary. This is not about right or wrong. This is about learning, opening, expanding, and thinking. And please allow us to, for guidance from the facilitators or the volunteers to help you get the best experience possible. Leah?
Thank you. Yeah, and then just to add to all the awesome things Summer just said, just with comments, yeah, folks can see it. If you wouldn't say it to someone in person, then consider not saying it in the chat. Let's just be here to respect and uplift each other. So thanks for that. And then as far as Zoom, we invite you to rename yourself. So to do that, you click the 3 dots in the upper right of your image, and then just, add your name. You can add your preferred pronouns if you'd like. And then just get familiar with Zoom. Mute and unmute is in the bottom left. When you have to kind of scroll your mouse over to see the bar, and then the camera is there. We invite you to have it on, especially in discussion portions. But obviously we want you to take care of yourself. So do what you need, and then chat. Just feel free to practice using the chat. And if you're calling in, we want you to know that you can actually text the tech support number and use that as a chat box. So that number, and I'm going to say it a couple of times because I know you're calling in and can't see it, is 505-393-1355. That's 505-393-1355. And you can also use that same number for tech support at any time. And also, if you're on the phone, we will have portions where we'll invite you to talk in breakout rooms. So you're going to press *6 to unmute yourself. Okay. Next slide. Oh yeah, there's the tech support number again. And then if you are on your computer or you're on your app, you can also privately message any of the hosts or co-hosts if you have any questions or concerns throughout the plenary. And then just to bring people's awareness, volunteers have the word volunteer in front of their names. Say hello. You'll likely see a volunteer in your breakout room, and you'll understand why then. And then, like iterated before, please take care of yourself. It's a 2-hour, 15-minute session. And we just want you to get water when you need it, stretch, go to the restroom, have your camera on or off, depending on your needs, like really support yourself through this. All right, Summer.
All right, so we are entering the panel. Yay! The first thing we would like participants to do is kind of ground yourself and check in. So our question is, what are you noticing of how climate change is affecting the land where you stand and live? So Leah, could you demonstrate how participants would answer this and put it in the chat box?
Yeah, sure thing. So I'll copy and paste what I'm about to say, but my answer is I just moved to Tewa land in northern New Mexico. I've been experiencing drought conditions for the first time in my life. My neighbors who have been here much longer have noted anomalies like late freezes in the spring and more prolonged periods of drought. So if you are calling in, you can feel free to text your answer to 505-393-1355. And everyone else, we invite you to write in the chat box. The chat box should now be open so you can just chat to everyone your response to what you're noticing about how climate change is affecting the land where you stand and or live.
We're going to give like 1 minute just to see what answers pop up, and then we're going to move straight into the panel. Highly erratic precipitation, fluke storms, fires, extreme drought, increased temperatures. In Albuquerque, reduced average rain. Wow. Okay. Live in West Central. MN is Minnesota? I live in the Virgin Islands. I'm making sure. Yes. I live in Boston. It can be hard to see the effects on the land, but there are abnormal weather patterns. Wonderful. Thank you so much for all contributions. Next slide. Please keep entering them. This will be good to know. And now we're going to introduce our panelists. Leah.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for sharing. It's really just, it's so important that we all connect on this topic and learn from each other. So we have an amazing lineup of panelists with us today. They have been so generous with their time, and we're honored to have them with us. They range from leaders generating global climate change solutions to leaders with boots on the ground practicing climate resilience. And I could spend all day in introductions, so instead I'll just briefly introduce each panelist, and Leah Ritchie will send links to their fuller bios in the chat box. So we have Dr. Lakeisha Odom, who is a scientific program director at the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, where she pursues her commitment to promoting the use of innovative science, collective impact, and the development of public-private partnerships to tackle today's complex challenges in food and agriculture. And we have Brian Van Stippen, a primary contact for the National Indian Carbon Coalition, who provides education, training, and technical assistance to tribes and indigenous landowners who are interested in entering the carbon credit market. We have Chris Mehus, who is the Ranch Program Director at Western Sustainability Exchange. His life and career are focused towards helping agricultural operations be more economically viable, while also being complementary to wild ecosystems. And last but certainly not least, we have Lauren Poncia, a fourth-generation organic rancher who has redefined small-scale family ranching through carbon farm planning, grass-fed beef and lamb, and much more. And Leah is sending links to their bios in the chat. And I will pass it back to Summer now, who will guide panelists through the first round of questions. And I will be setting a timer for 5 minutes and have a pretty chime that plays when the 5 minutes is up.
All
And
right.
I just got a message too that it looks like the images got mixed up on that. So, oh yeah, Chris is actually the image that's second from the left, and Brian is all the way on the right. So sorry about that.
Lakeisha, Lauren, Chris, Brian, in terms of images.
Sorry, everyone.
Next slide, please. All right, panelists. And for participants, this might be where you want to do speaker view if you know how to do that, where you can toggle over and switch, because that way you will see the panelists. You'll focus on the panelists and all other participants will move to the side or the top. In this really interesting time of uncertainty, where we talk about climate change and the fact that Leah and Sarah mentioned the interesting paradigm shift that we're taking, right? Where agriculture and has been a major contributor to climate change. And now we're here positing your panel posits it as part of the solution. Can you tell us a little bit about your work and what's giving you hope for the future right now? Lakeisha?
Absolutely. First, I would like to just share appreciation and excitement to be here and to talk a little bit more about the work that our foundation does at the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research. I will share just, oh, I will not share slides, and that's okay. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about an anchor as I share my perspective, who I am and what our organization does. We're a nonprofit that we use public-private partnerships to fund additional research gaps. And so it's a huge opportunity in this space to think about opportunities that research can answer some of these challenging questions that lead to on the ground solutions that you'll hear from some of the other amazing panelists. So primarily at the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, I work in the soil health challenge area, which is the portfolio of work that holds soil health practices, regenerative ag, those types of activities are the things we look for, those key questions or challenges that are really preventing the space from moving forward, or opportunities for partnership, or opportunities for innovation. So that's what we think about. So when you asked me what's giving me hope for the future, what really popped in my head at first is I wanted to share what's keeping me up at night, and then what's keeping me going during the day, right? And so what's keeping me up at night is exactly what the chat mentioned, right? Talking about all the different extreme weather events that we're experiencing, drought. I'm in Alabama currently with my family. We are literally going through a hurricane and the power is out right now. And so just these more and more hurricanes, more and more droughts, so much uncertainty, so much of a lack of a need for resilience. We have drought, we have increased pests, we have, and then you could layer all of that under global pandemic now as well. And all the while, our agricultural system is being asked to remain productive. We're being asked to feed people, to do what we normally do, but under these unusual stresses. And so that's what keeps me up at night, is how can we, through research, through partnership, through working with farmers and ranchers, through working with partners like the panelists that you'll hear in a couple of minutes, how can we address these challenges but remain resilient? How can we do that? And so that's what keeps me going during the day, right? That is the part that is exciting, is that there are a number of opportunities, especially in the space around carbon sequestration, the ability for our soils to become a agent of change in a positive way in this climate space. And so how can soils sequester carbon? So a lot of the questions or things we're thinking through now are how can we effectively measure how much soil carbon can be sequestered? What are the methodologies? How can we effectively create tools that allow farmers and ranchers to understand what changes they can adopt that would really allow them to affect change and manage their resources to the fullest of their ability. So those are a lot of the things that I get excited about. We recognize that we need a rapid and far-reaching transition, and that we need to stabilize greenhouse gas concentration. So we know what we need to do, but there's a lot of opportunity in greenhouse gas efficient farming technologies and practices. And we see that through using soil health and regenerative practices, there's so much opportunity to not just minimize harm to the planet, but to start producing in a way that actively restores health. And that is something that is very different than when I was trained initially as a scientist, is not thinking about how we can restore, but usually how we can measure, how we can understand. And so what's been so exciting in this space for me is a shift to community, to restoration, to rebuild. And so thinking about ways that we can do that in this scientific space is really, really exciting. And thinking about how we have a human scale remedy for global warming that's ready for implementation. So we have tools and working together and thinking about how we can move to a more holistic way of management, which, given the way we opened the discussion, it's not we're doing a new thing, it's that we're reverting to, right, the original ways in which the land was likely managed. But we've lost a lot of that knowledge, and we never had some of that knowledge. Communities did, but we might not have. So how could we learn from those ancestral ways of managing land? How can we work with the land and figure out ways that we could be more regenerative? So I think in thinking about all of the opportunities that exist for change, there's definitely potential to reduce emission, as we work with farmers and ranchers, scientists, nonprofit folks working together. Perfect. So I get to wrap up and just say that the things that are exciting me most are the exciting research questions and the unique ways that we can work together to bring some of those changes to fruition. And that is what is giving me hope for the future right now. Conversations like the one we're in today. So I'll stop right there.
Oh, oh my goodness. That was a mouthful and very worthy of hearing. Talking about the fragility of our environment, talking about the opportunities to restore it, talking about human-centered and scalable approaches, talking about supporting the ancestral knowledge and the reclamation of that. Like, wonderful. And now I feel like it's an easy toss to Brian. Brian, please tell us about your work and what's giving you hope for the future right now.
Certainly, and if I can share my screen, please.
I think you should be able to. Let's see.
Lynn, I think you'll have to unshare so that Brian can share.
Awesome.
There we go. Now I have sharing capability. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I should say. Sorry about that. It's my third presentation of the day on my organization, so I greatly appreciate being invited to this conference. I had run into Sarah last December at the Intertribal Agricultural Council Conference in Las Vegas, which seems way longer than a year ago. The pandemic began, and have now been doing the majority of my presentations virtually at conferences similar to this. And I greatly appreciate the invitation today to discuss the National Indian Carbon Coalition and some of the work that we are doing. So we're not going to be able to get through all of this material that I have. I'm going to try to get through a portion of who we are and what we are doing at the National Indian Carbon Coalition. So NIC, as we call it, was created by the Indian Land Tenure Foundation and the Intertribal Agricultural Council. Those are two tribally owned and operated not-for-profit entities. My role is to develop carbon sequestration projects on tribal lands with tribal nations in the continental United States, First Nations out of Canada, Alaska Native villages and corporations, or Native Hawaiian groups. And so I do have projects ongoing with the majority of those entities and this population throughout the United States, which is a great opportunity, I feel, to be able to travel around the U.S. and see different tribal lands and different tribal natural resources. And that's one of the main things that we're looking at trying to do, is help the tribal nations and indigenous populations protect and preserve their land rather than doing extraction or exploitation of their natural resources. And that's a big proponent and aspect of the work that we're trying to do as well as eliminate and minimize human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. So the preservation of the natural assets is a large thing that we see in Indian country. A lot of times it was always focused on extraction of those natural resources, whether it be the forest lands or the coal under the ground. It was just a lot of decimation of tribal lands. We're trying to move away from those types of protections by establishing stable management practices on those lands. And it's starting to take a lot of, we're starting to see a lot more interest in this type of opportunity for tribal nations. The biggest thing that we're looking at right now is ensuring that we have these assets for the children of the future. So some of the benefits that we look at for Indian country is, of course, the revenue generation opportunities. A lot of times when we focus on implementing carbon sequestration projects on tribal lands, we're taking other opportunities off the table. So we want to ensure that the tribes are seeing that there is still revenue generation capability by taking different types of methods and put them in play. Obviously, a preservation of tribal land ownership is a big mission from my parent organization, the Indian Land Tenure Foundation. We promote land stewardship. The greenhouse gas reductions is a large part of addressing climate change. And then, of course, the promotion of soil health, ecological diversity, and water and air quality. When I was working for the Ho-Chunk Nation in western Wisconsin, there was a lot of silica sand mining in our area for fracking, and we had some of the best silica sands in the world that were in the southwest region of Wisconsin. But as the mining companies would stack that sand, it would start blowing throughout our community. So we had to put in and establish air quality monitoring systems to determine where that silica sand was being blown around to ensure that it was not providing and giving our tribal members respiratory issues. So there's all kinds of different aspects that we look into consideration when we're looking at carbon sequestration projects on tribal land. And some of our primary activities is looking at and finding the complexities of the carbon market. There's a couple of different carbon markets, the compliance markets in the California Cap and Trade Program, as well as the voluntary market. And we want to ensure tribes are working with credible partners that take into the cultural appropriateness of tribal nations and tribal culture, as well as give unbiased and independent information to the tribe. One of the things I want to ensure is that there's any data that's ever created or developed that is owned by the tribe itself, not an outside third-party consultant. We also provide some services with web mapping and education and guidance on carbon sequestration management practices. So those are some of the activities that we're doing in Indian country through the National Indian Carbon Coalition. One of the things that I'm greatly excited about is that we are now able to promote a few of the projects that we have, which I'll get back into the second section when we have an opportunity to look at our current projects. But we're seeing a very strong interest in tribal nations looking at energy independence, energy sustainability, looking at food sovereignty issues. So while the pandemic has not been the greatest for travel, it has really shined the light in Indian country as to how do we protect and preserve our natural resources in our tribal communities by providing energy independence and food sovereignty. And so I'm extremely glad that we are now participating in conferences like this and talking about these issues on a much wider scale.
That was wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass it to Chris. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about your work and what's giving you hope for the future?
Chris, you are muted if you're talking.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Sure can.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting this panel. It's really exciting to be a part of this group of four to explain kind of what the opportunities are before us. And so my part in this is to kind of drill down a little bit further and get into some of the work that's being done on the ground. And I think that's what excites me the most is just being engaged with people that are on the ground making a difference for climate change and creating more opportunities for the implementation of regenerative agriculture. So again, I'm Chris Mayhews, and I work for Western Sustainability Exchange, and I'm going to talk to you about our Montana Grasslands Carbon Project. Okay, and so I want to start it off with reading a quote that came from a book that was very inspiring for me. I would encourage you all to look it up. It's a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, and it talks a lot about our relationship with nature and what we can do to try to rebuild some of these systems that were talked about in the opening. We're all bound by a covenant of reciprocity that calls us to honor our responsibility for all that we've taken and for all that we've been given and for all that we've taken. And I think this is just a really important perspective, because a lot of what regenerative agriculture is about is giving back. And so the way we're engaged in this work is we're working with a company called Native Energy, and we together with them are catalyzing the regenerative transformation from conventional grazing to regenerative grazing. It's really an exciting space, working with a lot of really excited producers that are very passionate about what they're doing. So we're working with companies, as you can see on the left here, that have an issue, they have a problem, they want to invest money in ranches. The ranchers take that money and they invest it in their infrastructure. And so what we're talking about here, and these are some of our participating ranches right here, we're talking about water system development, we're talking about fencing, all age groups, as you can see. We're talking about planning, we're talking about getting down on our hands and knees and understanding our resource and understanding the health of it, understanding the forage that's available, budgeting that, and making sure we're managing it properly. And we've also gotten into an opportunity lately to bring people together. There's a lot of folks that seem like they're kind of scattered all across the country that are interested in this grazing movement, and we're bringing those folks together, and they're really excited about it. Back to the picture in the center, though, it's all about future, what we pass on to them, and that's what makes this work so rewarding and so important. So just a few things about regenerative grazing. Really, basically, it's trying to promote non-selective grazing. Okay, so we're wanting animals to go into the pasture, put their head down and start grazing, and not be picky about what's on their plate. We're also wanting those animals to avoid a second bite. So we don't want to go back and rebite those plants that have already been grazed once when they're trying to grow back and replenish their root systems. And then thirdly, and most importantly, and probably the thing that's been neglected the most over time, is allowing adequate rest, a rest period for those plants to come back. And I'll get into some more detail on that later. And this just gives a little bit more detail about what I'm talking about there. But the regenerative grazing model is basically putting many animals together in a small space for a short period of time, and then allowing longer periods of rest for those plants to recover. There's some details here that I won't get into, but you can kind of review the benefits of that. The alternative to that, what we're trying to transform from, is a conventional grazing model where, as you can see, here's a pair of cows. This is pretty typical what you see out there on the rangeland. Lots of open space. Cattle are not bunched together. And as you can see in the foreground of the photo, there's a lot of forage there that just gets unused. So this is just a diagram of kind of how our system is designed and how it works. So again, starting on the left, you've got the company here that's got an issue. And just a quick note, most of these companies are very committed to sustainability. It's part of their DNA. And this is another way that they can invest in being part of the solution. And so those companies invest money in a project that's developed by ourselves, Native Energy, and the rancher. That money flows into infrastructure improvements, and those infrastructure improvements flow into a healthy ecosystem, which is able to sequester more carbon. That carbon is then returned back to the company in the form of a carbon credit. And so with that, I will conclude, and I'll drill into some more of these details about supply and demand in the second part. So thank you very much.
I want to say, as we try to cram as much of this into 5 minutes, we could probably listen to like Brian for 45, Lakeisha for 45, Chris for 45, and Lauren for 45. Thank you for just being such gracious panelists. And now, one thing I wanted to highlight, and Chris actually brought this up when we were speaking, was that this panel was comprised of like from policy to research to like ground level, putting it into action. And so I'm happy to invite Lauren to speak, who's a 4th generation rancher, farmer rancher, to share his project and to share what is his work and what's giving him hope for the future. Lauren?
Hi guys. Yeah, this is my first panel on Zoom too, so I am going to do my best, but I thought I had 45 minutes, so I have 45 minutes worth of slides.
You're already killing the game, Lauren.
I know. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and power through a few slides, and let me know when I'm close to my time. Okay, see here, how do I do this? I think I can do this right now. Can you guys see that or no? Decline.
Not, it's almost there.
Is it coming?
Nope, share screen button and then just share.
Okay, let me see here. I gotta get back to that. Share screen.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see. There's a whole bunch of different things I could share. There we go. Share. Cool. So now you should see it.
Everybody sees it. Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. So I'm Lauren. This is our brand called Stemple Creek Ranch. We're basically right here in Northern California is our main headquarters, which is in Tamaulipas in Marin County. We're only about 60 miles from the Golden Gate Bridge. And what we do is we sell grass-finished beef, lamb, and pork pretty much all over the Bay Area. But tell you a little bit more about us is I'm a 4th generation rancher. So in the top photo there on the bottom right is Angelo Poncia. He immigrated from Garzano, Italy in 1897 with the dream of being a rancher here in West Marin. And we've been continuously farming and ranching since then. I'm the little baby in the top left corner there. And the picture below, it's very symbolic. The picture below is me and my father, and we've changed. We're in the same places, but the 2 generations below us are gone. So what we do is we have large groups of cattle that we rotate around the property to try and build soil and replicate what the buffalo did coming across the Great Plains, where they eat what's in front of them, stomp on what's below them, and poop on what's behind them to build healthy soil. So this is kind of a new concept for us. When I say new, we've been doing it for about 20 years. We've gotten a lot better at it in the last 15 years, but I'm going to show you a couple slides now that really show you basically what it used to look like and what it looks like now, which in my world is regenerative ranching and building and growing and having living life all around us and biodiversity, not only in the soil, but in the riparian corridors and with the livestock and with the people. So this is what it looked like, the Stemple Creek watershed looked like when I would look out the window from my parents' house where I grew up. And this is about 1989, 1990. And it's basically a lot of erosion along the stream banks, and the water would turn bright green this time of year because it would get deoxygenated. All the fish would die. The cattle would graze right next to the creek. They would drink from the creek, and they would eat every little blade of green living plant that there was next to the creek. And so about 25 years ago, 30 years ago, actually now, we started fencing the riparian areas, planting trees to hopefully build canopies over the tops of the tree or the creeks, cool the water, and allow for a lot of biodiversity. And what's happened for us has been unbelievable, but we've created this amazing carbon sink, but at the same time, a lot of biodiversity and lots of other critters now live there with us. There's about 50 types of migratory birds that now use this habitat. So if you look from 1990 in the top left to 2010, which is a 10-year window, 10 years a little bit later, and then 2018, you can see the dramatic change in the landscape. There's no bare soil. There's no hot water. There's tons of a carbon sink, huge carbon sink. And this is what excites me. And this is actually what gives me lots of hope for the future as a rancher and a regenerative farmer in this area, is that just in my short lifetime, we've created this change. And I look at now I ask myself the question, like on this slide, What's this riparian area going to look like in 100, 200, and 300 years from now? Is there going to be beavers there soon? Are the salmon going to come back? Will the stream flow year round? Like, these are all questions and dreams that I have that I know we can make possible. This is just 30 years, what we've done. And then I reflect back to the opening here today, and the place the question was asked is, what's this place around you mean, and what was it like? And I asked myself the question, what did this look like 200 or 300 or 400 years ago before white men came here and changed a lot of the things that are happening, and how can we regenerate it and make it this awesome place? So this is what gives me hope. And we're doing this all at the same time while we're actually regenerating the soil, regenerating the biodiversity with lots of different species, and it's actually beneficial to our pocketbook. So let's see here. I actually double dipped that one, I think, or maybe I went up instead of a down. Okay, I think that's my 5 minutes. Is that right?
That was exactly 5 minutes. Wow.
Oh, perfect. Awesome. Better to get lucky than be lucky. I'm going to stop sharing this.
All right, so we have gone through our first speaker round, and in all things new and innovative, we had it set that we would go into a breakout room and the next speaker round, but in full transparency, we are about 20 minutes, 25 minutes behind. And so what I think we'd like to do is we'd like to transition the way forward by first, if you guys have any questions, put those questions in the chat box, but also giving you a moment to stand up, talk, you know what I mean, space to speak voices in. Instead of going into the breakout rooms, then we will go to speaker round 2 and then send everyone into the breakout room. This is a bit of like iterative adaptability, like we're just gonna go for it. So if there are any questions, please use the raise your hand function. Feel free to stand up, stretch, turn your cameras off, take a water break. You guys have been listening for an hour, and we'll take about 3 to 5 minutes of questions from the audience, from participants to the panelists. So while we wait, I'll ask a question to any one of our panelists. In listening to each other's presentation, did anything, were there any major connections, or did anything stand out for you? Like, was there an aha moment that reinforced your work or made you think like, I want to speak to Lauren, or I want to speak to Chris or Brian? You know what I mean? Like, we want to speak to each other about our work.
Yeah, this is Brian with National Day Carbon Coalition, and we've been meeting frequently as presenters with each other. But that was, I think, the first time that I actually got to see anything that Lauren had done. He's usually been pretty busy and out in the field when he's been calling in to show us and discuss his project and what he's working on there. So I just thought that was unbelievable to see that change in the landscape, in photos, and like he said, I feel a short 30 years. So I just thought that was amazing. After hearing about all the good work that he's been doing, to see that captured in photos was unbelievable.
Awesome. We have a question in the chat. How expensive and labor intensive was it for Lauren to change his grazing practices?
I guess that's for me to answer. And it is not very expensive to change grazing practices. All it requires is a good electric charger and a good electric fence and some labor. So depending on what your labor is, I mean, it's very easy to change grazing practices, and I do it every single year. And there's a lot of new fun stuff that we're doing now with tumble wheels. Like, I could be a tumble wheel salesperson because it's so fast and easy to move tumble wheels. We can move 400 or 500 animals in literally 5 minutes, 5 times a day. But the most important thing is don't skimp on your charger. You got to have a good charger. So it's cheap and easy to do.
I also have a question for Brian and Chris. Let me go back up to it. It says, I understand that some indigenous organizations are criticizing nature-based solution and carbon markets. I'd love to hear what you guys have to think about this, what you guys have to say about this.
Yeah, that's one of the major concerns that I have often when I'm meeting with tribal legislators, tribal staff, tribal membership, is that concern. There's three main concerns that we've seen as issues in Indian country. It's the timeline for some of the projects, specifically on the California cap and trade market. It's a 100-year time frame. There's also a limited waiver of sovereign immunity that is required that has some tribal concerns. But the big one that we're looking at overcoming always is, well, we're just allowing polluters to pollute. And that is a question that we've taken very seriously at the National Native Carbon Coalition. We try to promote tribal projects to trend toward the voluntary carbon market. And we are in the process of announcing, which we have not done yet, which I guess right now I kind of am, a relationship with the Nature Conservancy. In that partnership with the Nature Conservancy, they are bringing buying groups to the table for some of the tribal projects that we are just getting online with. It's going to take some time to develop the credits, but we are thoroughly excited to be working with TNC as they have thoroughly vetted social responsible organizations that are willing to purchase carbon credits at a higher rate than is currently be selling on the voluntary market. So that's something that we are getting ready to promote here. We call it the Tribal Land Conservation Initiative. And we're excited to get our first handful of tribes under our umbrella with this new initiative, and then we'll be making a larger announcement once we have signed. I actually do have one tribe that has approved it via tribal council, and I am on the agenda for November 18th for our second project underneath that initiative. So it's a concern that we've taken into consideration. We feel that we've come up with a solution for that concern, and I would be more than willing to discuss that opportunity in Indian country with anybody after the conference, or feel free to reach out to me via my contact information, the email or telephone, which I'm sure will be provided in the bio. Chris?
Yeah, I'll just add quickly, and really I'll first backtrack a little bit and respond to the question that was posed of Lauren. I think it depends on where you are and what your situation is and what your current infrastructure build out is as to how much that's going to cost. Most of the ranches here in Montana, they vary. The project participants now are 2 to 50,000 acres. On a 30 or 40,000 acre ranch, putting in pipelines and wells and storage tanks and fencing is incredibly expensive. So it really depends on where you're at. And I think my response to the second question is, I'll follow with, we're not going to solve this climate crisis with just taking money from very select few companies. And so, yes, we need to hold companies accountable and responsible for their emissions, but I think we also need to recognize that there is value in the offset market and what the offset opportunity provides in terms of carbon sequestration, because it's pretty large. And I think as long as companies are doing the right thing and heading in that direction, that we shouldn't turn down money that we desperately need to get this infrastructure in place.
I agree with Chris. I just wanted to piggyback on that quickly. That's what I try to tell tribes, is that this is one of the tools in the tool chest. This is not the solution to combating climate change, but this puts us on the path to do so. And so hopefully generating revenue through sustainable management practices helps tribes develop further renewable energy or carbon sequestration or energy efficiency projects on their tribal lands. Big push we're seeing right now is weatherization of tribal homes. So I'm excited about where the future leads in Indian country.
So this question is for Lakeisha, and then after this, we'll take 2 more, and then we'll move forward to this next speaker round. Lakeisha, where do you see is the most need for research? Where is it missing? Where does the research need to happen to influence the most policy?
I saw that question and I was really excited because I think what Brian and Chris and Lauren have been talking about kind of highlights the research gap. So a lot of the spaces where we need additional research is in regionality, right? Regionally site specific recommendations, because what works where Lauren is won't work where I am. And so I think we've got a lot of great information, but it's not necessarily is evenly spread. It's not a lot of information about the benefit back if you adopt these practices. When can you expect to see change? When can you expect to see some sort of economic benefit? So there's a lot of interest right now in that regenerative ag space, but specifically around some of those socioeconomic pieces and how can you adopt these practices? What is best per region? What types of practices work best in what region? So that's a lot of the space we're excited about. And another place that I think is really interesting is looking at a lot of what Brian and Chris were mentioning around how you can accurately measure, record, and verify carbon such that it can go into markets, and then how much carbon could be sequestered by soil type, for example, because it will vary. And so things around, I think, making it more regionally specific are the spaces that I'm seeing a lot of excitement and interest. And that's where FAR, our organization, is typically more focused. So I would say that.
And this question is for whoever wants to answer. Is regenerative ranching extending onto public lands, especially in the Western US? Do you guys have any opinions on that or thoughts?
Yeah, I can. Lauren, did you want to jump in on that, or?
Go for it.
Okay, I'll wade right in. Yeah, our project includes, and I'll get into this a little bit more in detail in the second session, but we have 2 ranches that have a significant amount of public land, and those lands are eligible to be a part of their grazing system. They can trade credits. There are certain mechanisms that need to be in place to make that legally viable, but there is an impediment to that, in that there's not as much flexibility in federal policy for grazing management as we would like to have. And so that's an issue. It depends on the office. It depends on the allotment manager. But what we're talking about is a traditional policy of just putting a few animals on a very large acreage and calling it light grazing, when if they're out there for 6 months, they're going to regraze the same plants and graze them out of the plant community eventually. So we know that the better way to do that is to put animals in densely crowded pastures, move them very frequently, just like Lauren described, but sometimes that doesn't fit federal policy. So it can be an issue, but it is a big opportunity that we need to try to take advantage of. Go ahead, Lauren.
I think it's a huge opportunity too, and people often ask me what technology would be great for the industry to be able to fast forward it. And I live in an area where there's lots of funding for technology. And I still think virtual fencing would be the most significant thing that could ever happen to the regenerative movement, because you could take public lands and areas in Montana that have 50,000 acres of places between water, and then you could put virtual fencing and move the cattle around. So it's a little bit of a dream, but if you don't dream about it, it's never going to happen. But so I'm basically just dreaming right now, but it's good to get you to think about, like, virtual fencing would take all of this to the next level.
The other thing really quick, Lauren, is if you guys Google Glenn Elzinga in Idaho, he's using herders instead of electric fence or collars, and having really good success with that. So herding is another, again, old practice that is not used commonly, but has a ton of potential.
All right. Go ahead, Lauren.
I just said Glenn's amazing. Yeah.
So I wanted to say thank you guys for being like impromptu and blowing up the chat box with these amazing questions. There's so much rich content and inquiry there that we're gonna pass on to the speakers. But I'm gonna let them get to speaker round 2. And as we iterate, we're gonna navigate how we get you more answers to those really great questions. So I'm gonna pass to Leah. And Lynn, if you could pull up the second speaker question.
Thank you, Summer. Thank you, Lynn. So as you all heard and noticed early on, one of the things we're really focused on at Regenerate 2020 is how we build a more just and equitable world, a future that is guided by the visions and leadership of Black, Indigenous, and people of color all over the world. Thus, our next question to panelists is, how are you ensuring that your work is reflective of the future that we need to build? And that future is a future that is truly equitable and just. So this is about who you are working with and why. So again, the question is, how are you ensuring that your work is reflective of the future that we need to build? We're going to go in reverse order this time. So Lauren, I'll ask for you to go first and let me know when you're ready, and I'll set the timer. And this time I can actually see you, so I couldn't see you before. So when you see my timer, I'll actually know if you give me a thumbs up or something.
Okay, cool. I'm going to share my slides again. They're just a couple slides, but this is, I think it all ties together with our first slides. Let's see here. Share screen right here. Whoops, right here. And then share. Boom. So you guys can all see that?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, so this is what gives me hope, what we were talking about after the last question. And really where we're at now is, I think the way to ensure that our work is reflected for future generations is we need to share what we're doing with our communities, with all the communities, and educate people about what we're doing. So we give lots of tours and we invite people to come out, and we have a full disclosure operation where we can have honesty, transparency, and quality. But our big thing, the more I realize this on a daily basis as we do more and more of this work, is we've made tons of mistakes. And we haven't read a book that said, this is how you do regenerative agriculture, or this is how you become a carbon farmer, or this is how you do organic. But what we've learned a lot of is by sharing and stealing ideas from friends and families and other people around the country. But sharing and education is going to become more and more and more important for us with all different types of people and all different, anybody who's interested, and the next generation. And we have this big responsibility to make, it exciting. I'm going to skip through that. I think I have another slide in here that I didn't put in here, but basically our responsibility is to help educate people, make it exciting for the current generation, which is me, and our kids or friends or family and other people that are interested. So it doesn't have to be my kids or my nieces or nephews that are interested in this business. I want to help educate other people that are young and aspiring that want to raise high quality food and do that here on the property. And the other part about it that's exciting, but it's really, it's building future or excitement into the future, is when people drive by. This is a picture taken from Highway 1 in California, and you can tell which side of the fence is mine and which side is my neighbor's. And mine's where all the cows are, and there's 2 feet of grass, and the neighbor's is basically the start of desertification. And everybody asks all the time, it's like, well, what are you doing differently? And it's like, well, it's a great opportunity for us to educate people and to show what we're doing, the practices we're doing, and help people learn. And at the same time, those same people are consumers that can vote with their dollars and buy products from people like me that are transparent and honest, instead of from Safeway or from some other large confined animal feeding operation that they can't put a face with the name of the person. So I think our future is bright. I think regenerative practices are working. I think we just need to blast it out there and get it exposed to all over. And I think we need to get people to their happy place. And that's me right there in my happy place on our ranch, right next to the riparian area, cooking up a whole bunch of steaks for friends and family on Easter Sunday. And yeah, if we share and we open it up to everybody and we learn from each other, I ultimately think that's really what's going to what we need to make the future get to the next level fastest. How many more minutes do I have? I could talk more.
You got another minute if you want it.
No, I think I'm good. I think I'm good. That's my message.
That photo, the joy in that photo is just beaming through my computer. I can just feel it. So that is awesome. And I love like just how visible, you know, the regeneration on your ranch is, and people can see it, and it begs questions. People want to ask questions because they can see the change. So that's really cool. Lauren. Thank you.
Cool. Okay,
All right.
Stop sharing.
All right, cool. And Chris, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
All right. I will put 5 on the clock. Actually, I'll wait for you to share screen. Are you sharing screen?
It should be shared. Let me check. I thought it was.
Try one more time because it might have just overlapped a little bit with Lauren.
Okay, sorry about that. Let me get over here. Navigating.
There we go. All good.
Okay. Well, Lauren, we didn't practice this, but you led right in how I wanted to start. You know what Lauren talked about with regenerative agriculture, and people ask, you know, 20 years to us or to a practitioner on the ground might seem like a really long time, but I appreciate the perspective Lauren put on that. And people want to know how he did it. And I think the biggest thing to understand about regenerative agriculture is it's not prescriptive. And that's why, again, going back to that book, Braiding Sweetgrass, I learned a lot from that book about how instead of being prescriptive and wanting answers to be able to go out and apply, we need to, and this is my understanding of it, we could be in relationship with the land instead. We could be in relationship with the vegetation and the water and the soil. And being in relationship creates understanding, and it creates adaptability, which is not prescriptive. You can't do what your neighbor did. It's going to be different on your place. So I think that's really important to understand. So again, the carbon trading diagram, I went through this before. I don't need to do that again, but I just wanted to have you look at that. And I wanted to talk a little bit in our model about demand and supply. So this question came up in the chat box, so I think I can address it here. It was about the market and how it works and what kind of companies are coming into this space. And I think that down the road, we're going to have to worry more about pay to pollute. You know, we don't want to allow companies not to have this as part of their practices internally. We don't want them to just pay for these carbon credits as an excuse to keep doing what they're doing. But I can tell you that the companies that have come to us to purchase carbon credits are very sincere about what they're doing internally. And so they're making a commitment to their employees. They've got entire departments that are committed to sustainability. They do trainings. It's in their DNA. It's part of their practices. And but the other thing, they need to be assured that these dollars are creating an additional benefit. And so there's a lot of science, there's a lot of documentation that goes into that. And I'll just quote from Xanterra, but Xanterra Parks and Resorts is they're an original member of WSE 27 years ago. They've been committed to sustainability throughout. They're a national parks concessionaire, so obviously they've got a vested interest in that. They're internally, and they're also investing money into these kind of solutions. Again, we're talking about non-selective grazing. Herd instinct is another thing that we haven't really talked about, but that's created, or that's reinstilled kind of in these animals. Once you put them back together, you can see that herd instinct is part of what they're about. And so this is just another little example of a grazing system. I don't know if you all can see, but right here in the center of the photo, there's 120 pairs on about a 3-acre parcel. And they've split this pasture in many ways. It's a pivot, as you can see the pivot tracks there. But this is kind of to illustrate the fact that every pasture is different. There's going to be water challenges. There's going to be challenges. They're all very unique. But again, regenerative agriculture is not a prescriptive process. And so then this is really the key component. And they talked about that in the opening. We've got to rebuild, first of all, the soil biome below our feet. That's where the work gets done. That's where the carbon gets sequestered. That's where we're storing that carbon out of the atmosphere. And we need healthy plant systems. We need healthy biology. We need diversity to make that happen. And so with that, I will close with a resources slide, and I think this will be provided to you all, but I'll leave this slide up in case people have questions, and I'll turn it back to you, Leah.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thanks for uplifting the amazing book that is Breeding Sweetgrass and emphasizing relationships over and over again, because I think that is so important. And one of the reasons we're all here is to figure out how to be in right relationship with each other and right relationship with the earth. So thank you so much. And Brian, you look like you're all queued up. So here we go.
Certainly, as I mentioned, this is my third presentation of the day. So Zoom has been on since 10 o'clock this morning my time, and finally getting the end of our stuff. I appreciate Lauren and Chris leading into this discussion. I wanted to talk a few of the projects that we have going on at the National Indian Carbon Coalition. And then I do have one other thing I want to see if I can bring up, because after I saw Lauren's pictures, I wanted to mention it. But currently we are working with 3 tribes on forest projects, so improved forest management projects underneath methodology from the American Carbon Registry. Those are the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, the Lake Street Band of Ojibwe, both in Minnesota, and the Keweenaw Bay Indian Community in Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We're also working with Coda Energy, a Shakopee Washington Sioux community-owned energy producer. They use an agricultural byproduct that they get from Kellogg's to develop combined heat and power and apply that heat and power to raw molting. So it's been an extremely productive project for them. We ended up creating, in conjunction with Coda Energy at the National Indian Carbon Coalition, a methodology underneath the American Carbon Registry, because there was not one in the industry focusing on that. We are hopeful that we can bring it to more tribes throughout the upper Midwest, because a lot of those tribes are on propane or natural gas usage, and we're trying to see if we can use that as a woody biomass heating source to help develop additional carbon credits for these projects. For our purposes of discussion today, the Lower Brule Sioux Tribe is a project that we're working on in the newer protocol as well, avoided conversion of grassland to cropland methodology. Lower Brule Sioux is based out of South Dakota. They have contracts with Orla Redenbacher, and we're overproducing on their lands and starting to see topsoil loss, nutrient loss. So we are working with the Lower Brule Sioux to do cover crops into no-till practices to try to revitalize that soil. And in doing so and in implementing those practices, we are then able to develop and create the carbon credit. So they do have some revenue coming in off of establishing those practices on their land. We're using the Plant Vivo standard out of Scotland to implement that program, and that would be the first of its kind in the United States. We're getting closer every day to getting that project approved through Plant Vivo, but because we are working with somebody outside the United States, it's just taking a little bit longer. So those are the projects that we currently have going on. One of the projects in which I first met and had this discussion with Sarah last year when we were at the Intertribal Agricultural Council Conference was on a project we worked with the Santa Ana Pueblo out of New Mexico. This project was depositing compost on the ground at Santa Ana to try to revitalize the soil. And again, when I saw Lauren's pictures, I was thinking about this, and we did 3 1-acre test plots. The hard part for this project was that the Pueblo itself wanted to create the compost to be dropped on the land. And we were looking at a significant amount of land that needed to be provided with the compost. And so we're hopeful that the project can move forward in the future as we're awaiting Santa Ana to be able to develop their compost facility. But as the fuel earth view goes and we look in, we did our 3 1-acre test plots. And I'm assuming that you can kind of tell where the 3-acre test plots were from a Google Earth view as I scroll in and out here of how much a difference that made for just dropping 1 application of compost onto the ground on these 3 1-acre test plots. And so we've seen that these practices are viable. Obviously, you've seen with Lauren the work that he's done, that these can be done. It doesn't take a whole bunch of time. And there is federal funding available out there. A lot of the dollars that we use on these projects came from the USDA NRCS program. And we're just looking at trying to make sustainable management practices available to Indian country as a whole, no matter what your natural resources are, whether it be forest, land, agricultural land, energy efficiency, energy development. There's opportunities there for each and every one of those natural resources that whatever tribes may have. So I don't know where I'm at for time, but I wanted to mention a couple of our projects that we're working on, that there is movement afoot. We are seeing more interest every day. Again, it's been beneficial for me at my organization because tribal council, tribal staff are no longer traveling, and they are more prone to make decisions when they're sitting in their council rooms talking about these issues. And so I have been busier than I have ever been over this last 6 months, having discussions with tribes throughout the country, Alaska Native villages and corporations, and Native Hawaiian groups. It's been amazing in this unfortunate time that we're in, how much interest has been generated about these types of projects. So with that being said, I'll pass it on over to Lakeisha.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I should be able to actually share slides this go round. There we go.
Which is a really cool talk.
So I think that the first thing when asked this question is kind of being the change you want to see in the world. And I think that Lauren, Chris, and Brian exemplified that. And what that means for our organization is that we are looking at developing an initiative called the Agricultural Climate Partnership. And we're looking at how we can move U.S. agriculture to net negative for greenhouse gas emissions. And the way that we hope to do that is working with scientists, farmers, ranchers, other nonprofit partners, industry partners in an effort to unlock this potential. So in thinking about kind of what we want to do to answer these questions or move in this space, the other words that kind of come to my head and to my heart are commitment, intentionality, and purpose, right? So in all the other panelists, I think, provided amazing examples of that, where they're intentional in their decisions to move in this way and to work in this way. Even this conference is this amazing intentionality. And during the planning process, I was so moved by seeing how the commitment to finding a new way to work together, to be in partnership, to be in community. I'll often say, like, when we have these panels, I'll participate very often, and on regenerative agriculture or sustainable ag or the future of ag. And really what we're talking about is what will ag look like in the future. And I'll be honest, very often I'm the only person that looks like me. And so it's so beautiful to be in this setting where I see so many different people with different perspectives in this conversation. And so in thinking about how we can move this work forward, I think it's doing this but more, right? And thinking about how we're going to look at the future. It's how can we be intentional at who we invite to the table? How can our organization, for example, be intentional in the groups that we fund? Who do we work with? Do we just go to the same folks that we're used to working with, or do we really do the work of looking for other folks that have amazing perspectives and ensuring that they have a voice, and ensuring that they have a safe space, and ensuring that the path is open to learn from different groups with different experiences. So I think in thinking about what could be done in this future space, in this space of regenerative ag, how we can move this work forward, it's in being what we are, but all the time and on purpose, right? And making sure that we try our hardest to understand and learn and move forward from those spaces. And we won't get it right all of the time. But I think that the fact that we are committed to doing it, and I do feel as though I can say that the 123 people on this panel in this conference are at least committed to this good work, right? I think that moving in those spaces with intention and being purposeful in the ways in which we engage, I think that can help us to create the future that we want. I don't know, Leah, is that kind of the response that you wanted?
Above and beyond commitment, intentionality, purpose. I'm like rotating through those concepts in my mind. And you have a couple more minutes if you want to share any more, Lakeisha.
I think the spaces, like, I feel like everything that I could talk about would be things that we hope to do. So we're looking at ways in which we can be more intentional in working with 1890 institutions, because what our foundation does is we fund research. So we typically will work with institutions or nonprofit organizations more so than hands-on with farmers and ranchers, but we fund the research that supports the work that they do. So we have taken a hard look at the ways in which we funded, and I'll be transparent and say that we have not done the job that we should do in reaching out. So it's been an exciting space to recognize that we have room to grow, and that there are partners that are wanting to grow with us, and looking in that industry space and that NGO space and seeing that there are other groups that want to do this work with us, and figure out ways that we can, for example, create partnerships to train the next leaders in the space, but looking at how we can engage Native serving, Hispanic serving institutions, 1890 historically Black colleges in the land grant system, how we can create opportunities for them to engage, and really realizing that there are barriers to their engaging with us, right? We think it's easy, they can just apply, but that there were some systematic barriers as far as just we have a matching requirement, for example, and that's very challenging depending on your institution. And so how can we create ways in which we can make a path forward for these organizations and these institutions to work with us, and figure out ways in which we can create fellowships that honor who they are, and make sure that we create programs that train students in a way that make the most sense for them, and not just creating a kind of one stop fits all fellowship program. And there's no fault in that, but it is not intentional. And so how can we ensure that that seat is at the table, and not just that there's a seat at the table, but that we leave the door open and we give you directions on how to get to the table, right? We can't just say, well, there's a seat at the table if you don't know where the table is. So I think in thinking about how we can really like meet people where they are and change the way that we fund research in such a way that we can be what everyone else has talked about today, be more open, be more inclusive, be more of a safe space, be in community, right? And create in community. And I think that's the thing that's been so exciting about the whole panel, and listening to Brian and Lauren and Chris, is all of them, I think, have had that thread of that family, that community, that future casting, but it being this beautiful, inclusive vision of how we can work together, and changing a lot of the paradigms that we've worked together in previously, where it's more competitive, it's more kind of who you know, and it's not building a future together, it's more competing for a future. And so I think with the challenges that we're facing now, and all the anxiety that we talked about earlier, and the need for resilience, is this realization that I think we lost, which is we can do great things together. We can do hard things together. And so shifting that and working in that way, I think, is what not only is exciting, but it gives me continual hope for the future, right? Or at least
Yes, thank you. I see the chat box going wild. Everyone's just like, yes, snaps, thank you. That you just wove together so many of the concepts that were brought here. And I just appreciate everything that you're bringing here. And I felt like so many good points were made about the table. Where is the table? How do folks find it? The structural issues. Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists so much. And I'm gonna pass it to Summer, who's gonna prep us for breakout rooms.
So what we know now after the first plenary is that maybe we needed another hour, right? Because there's so much talking we could do together. But what we are going to do is attempt to get you all in small breakout rooms of 7 to 10 people, so that you can have some community conversations about what you're learning, what you're doing, what's inspiring to you, what does equity look like to you. We will give you a frame, but feel free to go into conversation as deeply as you can, right? In 12 minutes. I mean, so I'm not going to talk very long. You will be sent into random breakout rooms. Please have 10 minutes of beautiful, gorgeous conversation. Make space for everybody. Try to hear as much voice as possible. At the 2-minute mark, there will be an opportunity for you to take notes in a group map, and then you will be sucked out of the Zoom vortex back into this main room, where Leah and I will be waiting for you. Stina, you have like a 1 minute to get everybody on group map. She's gonna show you the tool, and then we're gonna get to it, and we'll make it work. Right. Okay.
Yep. Thanks, Summer.
Thank you, Stina. So from your conversations, what gives you courage in your own work right now? What is buoying you? Wow. Projects like this are buoying me from going from hurting to being more aware of, I can't see the rest of that. Watching people like Lauren and scientists, where did that go? It's still moving. I'll wait. I was trying to read along, but not successfully.
Sorry, I was trying to make it a little bit more legible for you all.
Please feel free to take a good look at your answers. Um, Learning to learn with and from producers, not just traditional research studies. That's what's giving people courage. Um, Reconnecting with buffalo grazing, willingness to accept mistakes and failures, seeing the network of partners, community conversation, folks getting on the, I don't know what the rest of that was. Regenerative funding versus legacy building. Knowing that our work continues to matter what driving forces. Learning how to share the water. Young farmers, how to diversify funds that are remaining stagnant for traditional sources. Knowing that your work continues in spite of not being able to gather in person. Yes. Younger farmers and new ideas about higher latitude work leading to or towards the future. I'm thinking mentorship. This is the convergence of all your conversations. This these results will be given to Kivera and the Regenerate conference planners, and hopefully once deciphered in something that's really easy to read for you guys, will be up on CVent. But just take a gander of all your brilliance, all of your collective genius. We want to just thank you all for being so gracious as we navigated this moment. And we have one final question for our panelists. This is a lightning round. And so I'm just going to ask, and anyone jump in. Do you have a charge, like with all that we shared about resilience and equity and what's giving us hope and what's giving us courage? Do you have a charge for the participants?
This is Lakeisha. I'm happy to start. I think that the charge that I leave everyone and myself, right, is to hold these things close to us because we're in a trying time and it's difficult and it's hard sometimes to stay committed to it. But I think the charge would be to kind of ground ourselves in what we value, and that previous slide was just such a beautiful example of all the things that we value. And so I would say this, but just more of it, right? Like more of this, more of these conversations, more of these ways to interact with each other. So just more of all the good stuff is what I would say.
Well, I'll jump in and say that I think that we're inventing a new process here. A lot of this is really innovative and fraught with challenges. So I would just ask everyone to become part of the solution. Oftentimes, as humans, we look at what won't work, and we're quick to point out challenges and issues. I say with this, let's try to take the opposite approach and look for things that will work, build one another up, leverage one another's strengths, and create a solution here that's good for business, that's good for agriculture, and that's great for the environment.
I would say get in touch with people that are being successful in your communities. share and steal ideas, be nice to each other, especially in these political times. I mean, there's so many people that I just like don't agree with politically, but we have to come together more instead of, no matter what color, what kind of farming, who you are, we have to come together and work together to just achieve common goals and support each other. And the most important thing you can do is know where your food comes from. So you vote with your dollars, either raise it yourself or know where your food comes from and support people that are trying to do the right thing. And yeah.
Perfect, Lauren. This is Brian from the National Decarbon Coalition. Right now, my concern is that we are no longer have the ability to go carbon neutral. We have to go carbon negative. We're in that time in our society where we have to really take aggressive action. And so I just implore everybody, even if a carbon sequestration project is not attainable within your community because it's not for everybody, there's still a lot of practices that can be implemented to get into that carbon negative status. And look at every and all option that you have. Carbon sequestration is one of the tools in the toolkit. It's not the only tool, but we have to start putting and implementing all of these practices together in order to make sure that we take care of our generation, specifically for the next 7 generations as we plan for Indian country.
Thank you all so much. Leah?
Wow. Wow. I cannot thank you panelists enough. This has been so interesting, so amazing, so inspiring. I hope everyone in the audience know that we are so grateful for you too. And I hope you feel charged and inspired by that call to action from our panelists. And we appreciate all of you, like Summer has said, for your graciousness, your patience with us as we navigate this virtual world. We're so, so grateful to be together right now. And also, I just want to let you all know that this has only just begun. There are 3 more weeks of panels, there's film screenings, there's keynote presentations. And I just want to let you know what's coming up this week real quickly. First, tomorrow is election day. Please go vote if you can. If you've already voted, thank you, thank you, thank you. And the only session we have tomorrow is one on self-care, and it will be stretching and breathing with Alexis. And it is at noon to 1. Please check your emails, check your calendars, it's there. And then on Wednesday from 12 to 2, we will have our second plenary. And that one is on community resilience in times of uncertainty, another amazing lineup of panels. You will definitely not want to miss that. So check your emails, check the app, and Leah will post, already did post into the chat box how to go on the Crowd Compass virtual conference center. So definitely check that out. You can reach out to attendees, you can reach out to speakers. You can see, we will be posting slideshows over the next few weeks as they come in from the presentations. So please go check that out. Check out all the features, get used to that platform. And then the workshops continue this week. If you're registered for them, you'll get emails about those. And so once again, thank you panelists. Thank you to the participants, and thank you to the volunteers and the staff and the outside AGA, HMI. We appreciate you all, and we wish you a really wonderful rest of your day.